In the drawer of the kitchen table in her apartment in East Point, Georgia, Vivian Asante kept a single receipt. It was from a Western Union branch in Decatur, dated August 22, 2009, for $847, made out to the bursar's office of a university in North Carolina. And it was the last of 41 wire transfers she had made over 4 years to cover what her son Marcus's partial scholarship did not. 41 transfers. Vivian had kept every receipt. She had kept them in a shoebox first, and then, when Marcus graduated and she had put most of them away, she had kept this one receipt out. The last one. The one that had marked the end of the paying. Because she had wanted something in the drawer that reminded her, I did that. That is finished. It is done. She had taken it out of the drawer in January 2023, not to look at it with pride, but to look at it and try to remember the woman who had sent $847 on a Tuesday in August 2009, and had believed, without reservation, that the sacrifice was going to mean what sacrifices are supposed to mean. She was still trying to understand what it had meant instead. Marcus was 33 years old in January 2023. He was a senior marketing director at a firm in Charlotte, which was an impressive title and a real salary and the kind of professional life that Vivian had worked 3 jobs to make possible. He was also, as of 18 months earlier, a man who had introduced Vivian to his colleagues at a company event as his aunt. She had been standing right there. She had heard it. He had said, "This is my Aunt Vivian. She's visiting from Atlanta." She had smiled, because Marcus had looked at her in the specific way that asks you to go along. And she had gone along. And she had shaken the hands of 3 people who called her Marcus's aunt, and she had made small talk about Atlanta and the drive up. And Marcus had moved the conversation forward in the way of a man who has gotten what he needed from an uncomfortable moment. She had driven home that evening and had sat in the car in the parking lot of her apartment building for a long time. She had not confronted him. She had not called him the next morning with the specific anger that the situation warranted. She had done what she had always done with the complicated parts of raising Marcus, which was to give it time and see whether time clarified it or whether it simply made it hurt in a more settled way. It had settled. It had not clarified. Marcus had grown up in East Point without a father. His father had been present for the first 2 years and then not present, in the specific way of men who choose their own comfort over their children's need for continuity. Vivian had worked as a home health aide, a school cafeteria worker on weekends, and a late-night cleaning contractor for an office building in downtown Atlanta for the years when Marcus was in middle and high school. She had done it at the same time, in the way that mothers do when the math of what's needed and what's available requires ingenuity instead of options. She had arrived home most nights at 11 p.m., sometimes midnight, and had checked on Marcus's homework before she slept, and had been up at 5:30 to start again. Marcus had known. He had seen the schedule. He had been old enough by 15 to understand what 3 jobs looked like from the inside of a household where one person was running all 3. He had been grateful. She was sure of that. He had said thank you in the ways teenagers say thank you, which is imperfectly and not always at the right moment, but genuinely. He had called her from college every Sunday. He had done well. He had graduated. He had gotten the job. And somewhere in the years between the graduation and the company event, something had shifted in the way Marcus understood where he had come from and who he was allowed to claim in the rooms he was now occupying. She had thought about it from many angles. She had thought about class and ambition and the specific texture of upward mobility, which sometimes requires a person to build a distance between themselves and the origin point. She had tried to be fair to the psychology of it. She had tried to give it the context it deserved. But the $847 receipt was in the drawer, and she had looked at it in January. And she had not been able to find the angle that made being introduced as an aunt feel like something other than what it was. Nobody in that studio knew that Vivian Asante had worked 3 jobs and held a receipt for 14 years and been introduced as an aunt. She had applied to Family Feud because her neighbor's daughter had applied for them both as a birthday surprise, the way neighbors do when they have been watching someone carry something alone for long enough that any intervention feels appropriate. The team was her neighbor Doris, Doris's daughter Joy, Vivian's church friend Ruth, and a woman named Constance, who had known Vivian since Marcus was in middle school, and who had been in the car with Vivian, coincidentally, on the drive home from Charlotte, and who had not said anything for the first 40 minutes because there was nothing to say, and then had said, "You are going to have to tell him what that cost." Vivian had not told him. She had come to Family Feud instead. Steve Harvey got to Vivian during the intro and asked what she did. Home health aide, 26 years. He said that was one of the most important and undervalued professions in the country, and he meant every word of it. He asked what the most important thing about the work was. She said, "You learn very quickly that the person in the bed is not the sum of the hardest moment they're in. They are the sum of everything before it. Your job is to remember that for them when they can't." Steve looked at her. He said, "That sounds like something you also do for people who aren't patients." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at Constance. Constance gave her the nod. And Vivian Asante told Steve Harvey about 3 jobs and 41 wire transfers and August 2009 and the company event in Charlotte and the word aunt. She told it the way she told everything, with patience, without accusation, with the specific restraint of a woman who has processed this through every available angle and arrived at a place that is beyond anger and not yet beyond hurt. She said, "I don't believe Marcus is a bad person. I believe he learned, somewhere in the rooms he has entered, that where he came from is something to manage. And I believe he decided, without fully deciding, that I am part of what needs to be managed. And I believe that is a failure I also own, because I never asked him to carry me. I never asked to be named. I thought the 41 wire transfers would name themselves." She stopped. She said, "They didn't." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey had set his cards on the podium. He was looking at Vivian and not speaking. The studio was quiet in the way it goes quiet when something lands with its full weight and the room needs a moment to hold it. Then he said, very quietly, "He introduced you as his aunt." "Yes. You were standing right there." "I was standing right there." 300 people stayed completely still. Steve pressed his handkerchief to his face. He turned away from the cameras. He walked several paces and stood with his back to the audience. The crew had stopped. Joy, on the family side, was looking at the floor. When Steve turned back, his voice was in its lowest register. "Let me tell you something," he said. "There was a point in my life when I was so far from where I wanted to be that I was ashamed of the things that had made me. I was ashamed of the car I lived in, the clothes I wore, the circumstances I came from. I know what it is, from the inside, to be the person who is managing their origin. I understand the psychology of it. And I also know, standing here now, that every person who believed in me when I had nothing, every person who showed up, who gave me something, who made a sacrifice I did not fully acknowledge at the time, I owe them a debt that I have spent my entire career trying to pay back through this work." He looked at Vivian. "Marcus owes you, not money. Something he cannot repay with money. He owes you your name in the rooms he's in. He owes you, 'This is my mother. She worked 3 jobs. He paused, because 30 years ago, I was the man in those rooms who was managing his origin. And I know what it cost the people who loved me while I was doing it. Stop everything, Steve said. He turned to the wings. We're stopping the game. This has never happened in the 45-year history of this show. Not for a woman with 41 receipts. He walked Vivian to the front of the stage and sat beside her and asked, "What does Marcus need to hear from you that you have not been able to say?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need him to know that I am not asking to be in every room. I am asking not to be managed out of the rooms I already built for him. There is a difference between privacy and erasure. I can respect privacy. I cannot absorb erasure." 300 people exhaled. Steve held up his hand. He pulled out his phone. He called a family and identity counselor his foundation had worked with, live, on speaker, the whole room hearing. He explained the situation in 4 sentences. 3 jobs, college funding, corporate rooms, aunt introduction. The counselor said, "This is a socioeconomic identity conflict. Marcus is navigating class mobility shame, and the mother has absorbed the cost of it." She said, "This is absolutely workable, but it requires Marcus to become conscious of what he is doing." She said, "I want to work with this family." Steve arranged 10 fully funded sessions and covered all costs through his foundation. But Steve wasn't done. He held up his hand. There was more. He looked at the competing family, the Osei family from Columbus, and their matriarch, a woman named Ifua, who was 66 years old, stood before Steve could ask and crossed the stage and stood in front of Vivian and said, "My son did something similar, smaller, but the same shape. I want you to know it can come back. It came back for us. It takes the right conversation." Both families received the full $25,000 prize. Steve Harvey looked at Vivian Asante, at the receipt she had described that was in a drawer in East Point, and at every camera, and said, 5 words, 3 jobs, her name, always. When the episode aired 9 weeks later, the aunt moment, described in Vivian's exact words, with the specific detail of standing right there, became one of the most discussed clips of the year outside of purely viral content. It reached 260 million views in 11 days. The hashtag #BarsherThreeJobs Her Name was used by working mothers, first-generation college families, and anyone who had sacrificed for someone's upward mobility and been edited out of the story it produced. Sociologists, mobility researchers, and family therapists cited the episode. Several university orientation programs incorporated it into discussions of first-generation student-family dynamics. 3 months after the taping, Marcus called Vivian. He had seen the episode. The call lasted 3 hours. She has not described its contents in detail. She has said only, he used the right word. She has said, "That is a beginning." 6 months after the taping, Vivian attended a company dinner in Charlotte, a different firm, a colleagues' event where Marcus knew the host. He introduced her at the entrance, before the evening began, to 4 people. "This is my mother, Vivian. She worked 3 jobs and put me through school." He said it clearly. He said it without managing. He said it like a person who has decided that where he came from is not something to be managed, but something to be named. Vivian said later, "He said it the way I said it on that stage. Plainly, with the full weight of it." She kept the receipt. It is still in the drawer. She says she does not think about it the way she used to. She says it is no longer a question. It is just a record. A year after the taping, the Vivian Initiative, established through Steve Harvey's foundation, provides family identity counseling and first-generation mobility support for families navigating the specific rupture that sometimes occurs when children of sacrifice enter professional spaces that feel incompatible with their origins. In its first year, more than 550 families were served. Its motto came from Steve's words: 3 jobs, her name, always. Today, Marcus calls his mother every Sunday. He calls from Charlotte, sometimes from the office, sometimes from the car. He always says, "Hi, Mom." She always says, "Hi, baby." She has been his mother for 33 years. That is the word he uses now. She's still getting used to hearing it again. She says it sounds exactly right. If this story moved you, if you have ever sacrificed for someone's future and been asked to be invisible in it, subscribe and hit that thumbs up. Share this with someone who deserves to be named in the rooms their sacrifice built. Have you ever been the person who was managed out? Tell us in the comments. Ring that notification bell for more stories that remind us who deserves to be named.